All right. Thank you so much. It is so great to be here with you today and just have an incredible partner in Hearst. I actually did a post on LinkedIn where I was just saying like adventure, transformation, evolution, resilience, growth. Like, why wouldn't you want to hear more about that story? And today we're joined by two of the most incredible people from Hearst to talk about their transformation and evolution journey. But before we get going, what we thought we would do is just do a quick poll, get a sense of where things are today in regards to your perspective around business transformation, and why do you think most companies commit to transformation this year and right now? So a couple different questions. Is it seizing a new opportunity or grabbing into a new market that no one has claimed, adapting to new competitive pressures or protecting a market that you're already in, or maybe just surviving through current market pressures or some another reason entirely? So love to get your feedback and just get a sense of where you're thinking today and where your head's at. So we'll take a second and we'll look through the questions and get a sense. All right. Oh, really interesting. So for most people, the answers are adapting to new competitive pressures and protecting a market, 65%. Wow. Well, then today is going to be a perfect conversation in regards to adapting to new competitive pressures, but also protecting a market and looking at all these different ways that Hearst has done just that and more. So with that, what I'd love to do is just talk a little bit more about Hearst and our partnership. So when you think about Hearst, you may think about Hearst from the perspective of their digital or print magazine publications. I remember as a little girl getting to go to Hearst Castle, but there's so many businesses, over 360 businesses all across the world in every industry you can imagine and across so many different types of companies that Hearst has a diversity and scale like almost any, like no business that you could probably imagine. And with that said, one of the reasons why we think this is a really incredible partnership is the diversity and scale of both of our companies. And over time, the evolution, whether it's an industry, whether it's a market segment, whether it's a way we approach that market segment, that both of our organizations have evolved, and in this instance, evolved together. And we believe that's really why this partnership is so incredible to talk about. So what we want to do is start with just a video to give you a sense of the scope of Hearst. And from there, we'll go ahead and introduce our guests today. I love that video. It's so motivational and it just gives you a sense of the different scope, the different scale and the size of Hearst. And as I mentioned, and as you saw in the video, there's so many different businesses, so many different market segments and areas of the industry that probably for most of us, we didn't even know Hearst was a part of. But more than anything, the theme that just jumps out to me and through our conversations are around this transformation adventure. And I really think that's an adventure that Hearst has been in and continues to be in. And so with that, I would love to introduce both Deborah Robinson and David with us today to talk a little bit about their roles and their perspective on Hearst and its evolution and the relationship that we've had with Oracle. So with that, Deborah, how about you share a bit about yourself and your role at Hearst, and then we'll go to you, David.
Thank you. Thanks for having us today. It's great to be here with you. So a little bit about my background. I've been with Hearst for about 15 years, originally as VP of Digital Technology for the magazine group. And then after being a CIO or CTO in a number of companies before joining Hearst, and originally I was CTO of the magazine division. And then I was asked to be the senior delivery executive for the HR finance transformation, which included all the phases from selecting the systems integrator, software selection through implementation, of our journey to the cloud, which gets us to my current position as SVP CIO Oracle Technology Operations, which I'm responsible for the Oracle Technology and Functional HCM with the people that are reporting to me today at Hearst, along with a team of people in India from Accenture.
You've got your hands full, Deborah.
Yes, I do. And today I report into our EVP, Chief Legal Officer of Hearst, which is an unusual reporting relationship.
And you know I'm going to come back to you and ask you about that because that's its own adventure.
Yes, it is.
So with that,
And,
Dave, how about let's get a sense of your role and background and experience with Hearst as well.
Sure. So thanks for having us. I'm David Ostelias. I'm the Senior Vice President of Finance Operations at Hearst. And by finance operations, it's really, if you think about it, it's a transactional aspects of finance, both in our service center as well as in the business groups. And part of my role and responsibilities and my group is really to help drive continuous improvement, innovation, deciding on technology investments in finance, to continue to optimize our finance function across not just corporate, but the business groups. Very
cool. So it's just when you look at the diversity of just both of you, the experience that you have within Hearst, it's really that story of all these different elements of the business and all the different ways that, you know, maybe a prior experience each of you have had in a different business unit within Hearst now brings to the conversation around Oracle. And so thinking about that partnership and what we've been doing together, you know, I would say both of you have been with Oracle since some of the very beginning of our unification days and just even unifying our Fusion environment and our Fusion platform. And so I'd love to just get a little bit of perspective in terms of what that's felt like since those earlier unification days, and maybe just the perspective of what's it been like and what was it like at the very beginning with your partnership with Oracle. And maybe Deborah, we could start with you and just share a little bit about what that cloud journey has looked like and what it felt like at the very beginning, just to give us some context.
Well, at the very beginning, we had no environment at all. There wasn't really a legacy environment. So we didn't have Oracle, we didn't have SAP, we didn't have Workday. We had a green screen Infinium environment. So when we selected Oracle, we said we were going to cloud first. So that was our primary #1 selection. We were not going to have anything on-prem. So that was #1. So one of the things that we realized early on that this was a different type of relationship with a software company. It was a long-term relationship. It was not just selling software to us. It needed to be a relationship. And it was a very long period. We were a company that did not make a change in 25 years. From a green screen, we missed the 1990s, we missed the 2000s, that evolution. And we had to have a very strong relationship, and we're fortunate with Steve Miranda, who was on our steering committee. We had his insights that really influenced the outcome of our initial project. Now remember, we were one of the early adopters. We started 3 years ago. So that was high risk. We also had high reward with that. The reward was Steve Miranda and his team to this day. I look at that as a high reward. During the program itself, we had bi-weekly updates with him, and we continued to have that post go live. We have the ability to interact with the Oracle leadership team even to today. I can give examples of that where currently, this is not a sales cycle at this point. It's about interacting with the product team, Steve Miranda. I can give an example where we implemented Taleo, which was 2.5 years ago. Now there's Oracle Recruiting Cloud, changing to the new career sites. I was able to use Steve Miranda and his team, Nagaraj, the product team. Phil Ruhlman came in to meet with my boss, which is Eve Burton, who's the chief legal counsel, to help sell that change. You're making another major change 2.5 years later after an implementation. So that's the long-term relationship and how to maximize that relationship with Oracle and that change.
And it's just to me, the really coolest thing is, well, one of the many is just the decision to just jump right into the cloud. And like you said, that high risk, but high reward. and to just basically leapfrog that entire world and say, you know what, we're just going all in on the cloud, and we're going all in with Oracle. We're going to count on that partnership and that relationship. And it's awesome to hear how it's evolved over time, and that continuity of the people like Steve and others that you've developed relationships with, that you've been able to do that, which is awesome.
In a very complicated business where David can show a slide where it's very complicated about our businesses.
Yeah, no, it's really cool. So one of the things that I wanted to ask you, Deborah, and we're showing this here on the screen, is just, you were, as you mentioned, you're one of the early implementers across our portfolio: ERP, EPM, HCM. So, you know, human capital management, enterprise performance management, our ERP suite. What Oracle Cloud footprint does Hearst have right now? Can you give us a little snapshot of what that looks like?
Right now we have an HCM, recruiting cloud, learning, performance, core HCM. We have the finance, all the modules in finance, and then planning and budgeting. But as far as this slide goes, David, I think you should take this slide and how complicated we were or are as a company.
Yeah, I'm happy to. So people, I use this slide to kind of illustrate that, you know, we're an $11 billion diversified media company, and what does diversified really mean? And one of the, maybe not the best analogy, but a pretty good analogy is if you compare London to New York City, right? There are two cities that are roughly the same size in terms of population. You can obviously see London on the left-hand side, which is kind of a collection of villages, right? That's kind of grown up to a big city over time. And you had New York that probably had a little bit of a later start, but you know, most of the of Manhattan is kind of organized in avenues and streets. So we're clearly, the point of this is we're on the left side. We're more like London. So as you look at this and you say, well, geez, how are we going to go and implement, you know, standard processes, a single solution for something that looks like London, where you have this collection of villages, you have mayors, which we would call stakeholders, in each one of those. And how do you really get everybody, how do you navigate that city, so to speak, and how do you get people aligned to a common process when historically, to Deborah's point, right, that was not a mandate that we had. So going from London to New York has been part of the, as you referred to, as the adventure and the challenge of the transformation.
Right, and that's why it just gives a really incredible context to taking London, New York City, and all the other villages and cities in between, and saying, you know what, we're going to go from complete green screen to modernization in the cloud in one go, in our partnership with Oracle across all these different countries and groups of people. And then to take a look at that and say, okay, now let's standardize this environment and optimize it. It really gives you a sense of how complicated and what a big decision it was to do something like that. So it's incredible to see that.
Right, and then now if we can bring up the second slide.
And now we have an appreciation, Deborah and David, for
Yes.
what's like. It's like this, a beautiful, smooth slide where you're like, okay, great. This looks like a beautiful ecosystem. And it gives you that context of what it looked like potentially before.
Right. So now when we started, when David and I were implementing this project, we did core HCM, we did core finance, and then we started building all the modules on top of that. And on the HCM side, since we went live, we implemented learning, performance. As I just mentioned, on Monday, this coming Monday, we are going live with the new Oracle Recruiting Cloud and career sites. We did planning and budgeting, consolidation, the account reconciliation. So you can see that we keep adding modules on to the platform, the core platform that we originally implemented.
Yeah, no, and I know we're going to touch a little bit on the impact that just that recruiting and onboarding and that core HR has had to some of the business decisions that Hearst has made along the way and makes today, which is pretty cool. And so thank you for sharing that, Deborah. It's great to see that perspective. And so when we think about, you know, just getting your perspective on the partnership and some of the beginnings of those days, you know, when we think about looking across all the different elements of the portfolio, I know, David, we had this conversation about looking for opportunities to streamline and optimize. You know, could you possibly just share what motivated this approach with Hearst? You know, what was the perspective that said, you know what, we want to take all of these villages and cities and we want to do this unification? What were some of the motivations and reasons for doing that? Can you share that a bit, David?
So the challenge, one of the challenges that we had was we came from a very green screen, old, antiquated environment. And if you look at, you know, the risk associated with that, right? It's, you know, the concern from my boss, who's our CFO, was, you know, if this thing falls over, then how do we get this back up and running? Can we get it back up and running? And what are the implications? So from us, we kind of had a burning platform that said we needed to do something. So the motivation was very much, we need to get to a modern platform. As Deborah said, we hadn't made any investments in finance or HR technologies for 25 years. So the decision when we, you know, and we like we said, there was no incumbent, if you will. But the decision for SaaS was we didn't want to find ourselves in 5 or 10 or 15 years to have an, you know, unupgraded platform again that had been aging. So SaaS was a key important or a key factor. We wanted also an integrated platform. We didn't want to deal with multiple vendors. We wanted to have the HR solution be as the same platform as the finance solution. And to give you, I mean, you got some of the complexities from the pictures and kind of stories, but this has been, I think, the largest corporate investment that Hearst has ever made. And to give you a size of the you know, sense of size and scale, we had at the peak probably 120 people between ourselves and our partner Accenture working on this implementation. So this was a huge effort by the company.
So to me, you know, back to that theme of what Deborah said in the beginning, that high risk, high reward, it's astounding to me the commitment that both of you have been a part of in terms of, like you said, the largest investment in IT that Hearst has ever made. And when you think about what that looks like, and we look at, you know, I'm reflecting on that villages, towns, and the picture of, you know, London versus New York, it's a tremendous undertaking. And the expectation level, you know, I mean, I think as an Oracle employee, you know, I think to myself, gee, I want us to continue to live up to that expectation because it's huge. And so to me, that's transformation like at a scale that probably very few people can imagine, what to speak of be a part of. And so just thinking about, you know, with the expectations associated with something like this and an undertaking like this, maybe you could share a bit. What, Deborah, we'll start with you, and then David, I'd love your perspective. What are some of the outcomes that you've both seen and realized as a part of this evolution? You know, what are some of the outcomes and benefits that maybe you could share?
All right, I'll start. One of them was, and I'll start high level, Hearst did not have a corporate HR HCM department to begin with. We were very decentralized, so putting in a centralized system that needed administration. So we did put in a centralized HR department. That was one of the benefits here. That's why I report into the chief legal officer. And so some of the benefits now, especially with COVID, which have been very beneficial, we now have centralized onboarding. We implemented the onboarding system. So when we had to go and work off-site remotely, that was announced on a Thursday or a Friday. Everybody went home on Monday. We've been able to do the whole process from I-9s all the way through onboarding everybody through payroll, through benefits, shipping their equipment very seamlessly. Would not have been able to do that before. The LMS, we have a policy. We're not laying anybody off in the company. So we're upskilling employees right now through the LMS product. Everybody's doing micro-learning or live learning. We're also putting a lot of well-being, emotional training on the LMS. So we're using that extensively right now. Performance, we're able to continue our performance cycle because we implemented performance last year and this year. And also analytics, which is something we haven't talked about. So across finance and HCM, we put in the analytics ADW warehouse. So we're doing a lot of analytics, and myself every weekend, I provide analytics up to our CEO on hiring, leavers, voluntary and involuntary, and matching that data. across the company. So the benefits have been endless on the HCM side because we did not have an HRI system or HCM. We skipped that whole generation of the 20 years of deployments that were going on in that space.
And, you know, just, it's so neat, some of the things that you just casually dropped, Deborah, in terms of like not laying anyone off. That's huge. That's so cool. I didn't know that. And just the upskilling. I love that. You know, everyone's doing some sort of learning, cross-training, and the system to be able to drive that scale. When we think about, you know, the size and number of employees across the world that are upskilling and learning new ways they can add value to Hearst. I mean, that is, what a neat investment. And I mean, and then the ability to bring everyone in the company offline, if you will, or at least remote, and handle that with grace, to be able to say, okay, we know where everyone is, we know what they're doing, and now we know what we're going to do in terms of an approach. And so I think integrating all of those different applications with Oracle, and then now taking that step to say, okay, now what insight can we grab, and how do we leverage, how do we take a technology like autonomous data warehouse and let that enable us to make different decisions and capture insights around that. And I know we'll talk a bit more about that, but super cool.
And then the one my boss, Eve, is very proud about is the Hearst Lab. I know we have a video, we'll send the link out later, as we're also tracking high performance, especially women in the company, how many promotions have been related to that because women are scouts in the company, and we also are tracking turnover related. So.
And I hope everyone gets a chance to see that video. I watched it yesterday, and it's so cool when you look at Hearst Labs, and I mean, something that you wouldn't even imagine, but for those that get a chance to watch it, all these startups, all these companies that are entrepreneurs, all these people who need to understand how to get into a new market segment or a new business or how to scale the investment through these Hearst scouts. What a cool way to cross-pollinate and have like this mentor-mentee relationship where you have Hearst overseeing all these different small companies and helping them grow, while at the same time getting the perspective of what it feels like still to be a small, brand new company or business. It seems like a benefit on both sides. Really neat.
So we're able to track all the analytics through the system now.
That's so super cool. So maybe switching, David, to you, can you share with us, you know, this optimization and continued evolution that is a part of your role. What are some of the observations that you have in regards to this journey, some of the lessons learned? Can you share your thoughts with us?
Yeah, so I think from a finance perspective, right, in our legacy environment, not only did we not have standardized processes, et cetera, we also did not have a standard set of chart accounts. We probably had 10 to 15 at least charts, which for anybody in finance, I realize when you look at results at a consolidated level and you try to track it down and you see understanding what's actually happening with the business, there's a lot of translations and mappings, et cetera, and you kind of lose the transparency in terms of what's really happening. So part of it was getting to a common chart of accounts, which was a big thing for us. I think one of the kind of interesting side effects of having a HR and a finance system, and you know, when we talk about transformation, we tend to talk about, you know, people, process, technology, and sometimes data. And data harmonization is incredibly important in terms of getting the insights and the analytics that we're referring to. And as an example, when we initially implemented.
So I think, David, we're struggling a little bit to hear you, but the net of it is I'd love to show the slide, and maybe both of you could touch on it. That was just a snapshot of the example of what the finance path to the cloud looks like now, and what some of that, what a visual to what David was referring to. And then perhaps, you know, when I think about it, I think you shared there's this foundation for this next phase of transformation, and this ability to have these single common processes across all of the operating units is really a tremendous achievement. And maybe, Deborah, I could switch to you. One of the things that we talked about, and you touched on this just a little bit, is just this concept of something as simple as a job code. You know, that standardizing the different job codes, and you mentioned this in terms of onboarding people, looking at opportunities to develop talent, upskilling, but it really, you need to start with a core, which is what are the single set of job codes that you're referring to, so you can understand who the people are, where they are, what their skills are, and who potentially needs to be upskilled in what. Could you possibly just talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So when we first did the project, and I'm looking at the slide here, and we, yeah, I'm going to step back a little bit because we did our 9 deployments over the 24 months, and then this is like phase 2. So you look at Cloud 1.0, which was our foundational finance and HCM. And that was our 9 deployments, and we're on schedule and on budget. And then Cloud 2.0 is planning and budgeting, finance, financial and analytics. And now for finance, Cloud 3.0. So then we get to job codes. So we did our original job codes. We probably had almost 1 job code for every 2 employees. And we looked at that and we stepped back and we said, this is not working. And we redid our job code. So this is a learning that when you do your implementation, you see something's not working, it's okay. Just step back and look at it and say you have to refine it. I think it's an evolution when you do a project this big. And we went back and we redid them. Now we probably went from about 7,500, 8,000 job codes to 1,700. And we have people slotted in their proper job codes. This is still, we look at them constantly. We have to refine them, and we are remapping some people. Are they in a job code? Are they external facing, internally facing? And we remap them so we can make sure people are moving, have mobility across the company. With the launch of the new career sites, we have people could not look at jobs across the company before. So now we have people that can move across company into different positions, which was not a, people didn't even know what jobs were available before. So it's the mapping of positions, the mapping of people. It's created the mobility. It's really transformed how we do business within the company.
Yeah, and talk about perfect timing, Deborah. You know, I mean, who knew, right? The consolidation of the job codes to looking at what are the open postings and how can people diversify their skills and experience within Oracle. I mean, within Hearst. It also, what I was going to say is it reminds me about Oracle. You know, I mean, one of the things, like you said, if you're not letting anyone go and you're looking at all these different segments of different types of people that work at Hearst and you're upskilling them, gosh, imagine if you didn't even have the ability to look at jobs across the company. And so now you can upskill people and they have the opportunity to take their career into their own hands and diversify their experience within Hearst. It's pretty cool.
And we have openings. So now we have all the openings posted too. So it's a win-win.
And that's one of those things I think about when I talk to people about working at Oracle. I'm like, you have the opportunity to work in a ton of different companies within one company. And so, you know, when someone will say, you know, just ask me, what do you think in terms of what's my next role or where might I want to make a transition? I say to them, look at something that you want to do that perhaps you don't have any experience in, but because you're within Oracle as an ecosystem, you might be given the chance to upskill or diversify or change careers, even though you're still a part of that same company. And it sounds like Hearst has taken that concept and just taken it to a whole new place.
Absolutely.
So what I would love to do is just, you know, when we talk about this concept of diversification and getting to know not only the company Hearst and the partnership that we have with Oracle, but also a little bit about each of you. I mean, I can't even begin to imagine what it may have felt like to go from literally nothing to a giant investment in Oracle's cloud to connecting all of these different Oracle applications and integrating them so you can benefit from what that can do, but then taking it all remote. And like Deborah said, you know, upskilling and looking at opportunities to diversify talent. It would be great to get to know, you know, David, you've had a ton of experience in terms of finance transformations and practicing resiliency. How has your role evolved over time? And can we just get to know you a little bit more in your perspective of how even through this transformation, maybe your role has changed and evolved.
Sure. So, resiliency is an interesting word. And I think, historically, when we thought about resiliency, it's been about, backing up data and restoring applications in terms of, in case of outages, et cetera. I think in our case, resiliency took on a whole new meaning. And to Deborah's point, I think it was on a Thursday night, we sent an email out that said, we're going to start working remote. So we almost went remote almost overnight. And my concern, and it wasn't just remote in terms of managing multiple locations with people. It was, managing people that are working by themselves, where everybody is remote, everybody's by themselves. And if you think about that and the challenges, and I certainly early on, sat through a seminar on another company that had gone, went through the same thing, obviously, and the prep time where they could not get their payroll department to work remotely, and they had to keep them in for 6 weeks to practice during the, when they really probably should have been remote. And we almost went overnight with our payroll and the rest of our service center, and people started working remotely. And the most important thing was paying our employees, right? Making sure that we're paying them on time and accurately. And I'm very happy to say that, as concerned and nervous that I was about everybody being remote, it really functioned incredibly well. In some cases, the feedback we've gotten has been that, things are working equally, if not better, than what they used to do before. And if you take a step back, so you look at the investment that we made, and we were concerned about the technology falling over. In this case, it was more about that the organization ended up being distributed completely overnight. And in our legacy environment, there would have been no way that we could have continued to operate and function this way. And in the set of solutions that we have, that are pretty much all of them SaaS and in the cloud, and they're built to be accessed remotely, I think we pretty much we nail it from a perspective of continuing to operate in a remote fashion. It's but part of it is obviously transactional pieces, but it's also the ability, to your point, right? When all of this happened, and there's still a lot of uncertainty, but having the ability to have scenarios from a planning perspective and run them effectively and quickly, and you can imagine the amount of questions that are getting asked of our business leaders of what's happening in their businesses. So having that footprint to do that, and the capabilities to do that in a quick manner with everybody being remote was a tremendous achievement. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily what I expected or anybody else expected that we're going to operate in that way, but it's been good so far.
We'll talk about an opportunity to practice resilience, right? And flexibility. I mean, from moment to moment, even for example, on this call today, right? We all have to be flexible. We all have to be resilient. And there's no time like, this last 5-6 months, just to practice our own resiliency and flexibility. And, I guess it's like the giant master test to make sure that everything works. There's nothing like just jumping into it and making sure it happens. And so thank you for sharing your perspective, David. Deborah, you shared when we were talking about this episode, you said something that I doubt you realized in that moment that I'd ask you about again. But just you said sometimes you have no idea what your next day is going to look like, and that you're an adventurer basically all the time, which is why I even grabbed the word adventure. And your role has evolved tremendously over time. Can you share, maybe what your role was again, and then what it is now, and why it's something that requires a lot of flexibility? How about that?
Sure, because I've been with Hearst for 15 years. I've moved quite a bit through the company. I was always from the technology side. I do have a background in business and actually change management. So now I am not really in a tech role if you look at it, because Oracle's taking care of all the technology. So am I worried about servers? Am I worried about something's going to crash? No, Oracle is taking care of the servers, the network. I'm not worried about email anymore, which was part of my job at Hearst before. So now it's more functional, and I'm not worried about monitoring. So I will report into the EVP, Chief Legal Officer at Hearst. And that is because we did not have a centralized HR HCM department at Hearst when we put in the system. And we put in a centralized system, as you know, and who's going to administer the system when it was done. And I was still focused on finance as we were still implementing. And I kept saying, who's going to own this system? And it ended up, Eve had said to me, if you stay on and do this with me, we'll develop this new organization. Well, now we're on Revolution 2, I say Rev 2 of that organization, because again, it evolves over time. And it's been an adventure. So my job keeps changing. That's where I think flexibility comes in. Resiliency, flexibility, risk-taking comes in. I think behind David and I, we have an extraordinary team of people that helped implement the system and continue to help maintain what goes on, and helped us get to where we are. We did an exceptional job in 24 months, which I think is pretty unheard of, which was, to implement a system like this in 24 months and come in on time and on budget or under budget is like unheard of. So it was great partnerships also. And, every day is different because my job has changed based on reporting.
It's pretty
And the fact that I don't have to worry about technology anymore because everything's in the cloud.
right. I mean,
So,
we change management, Deborah. It's like, and conceptually, I think sometimes we all talk about change management and changing business processes based on technology, and you're living it. It's like, okay, my role was technology, and now because the technology works so well, it's actually not technology and it's something entirely different.
yeah, it's not about technology anymore. It's about adoption and change management. And the company views this, in my view, the company views this application as, and I mean, David, you may have a different view, as so important right now, especially on the HCM side. It just is being so protective of it. And that's why it's sitting where it is right now. For now, as we're still implementing, it's like the most important application the company has at the moment.
So I just have to like stop and put like a little bold highlight on that mentally. It's like the criticality of understanding where people are, how they are, what they're doing, how they're being upskilled, how they're being onboarded, who's leaving, why they're leaving. Now it's like you said, right? The chief legal counsel, just to be really aware of what is happening with every segment of the market. And then you mentioned this just casually. Oh, by the way, we're doing autonomous data warehouse and using that to develop more insight so we can be proactive about what we're doing with our people. I mean, just such a cool way to think about technology. And, it's like sometimes we talk about, applications, whether it's human capital management or ERP or you name it, right? Autonomous data warehouse, but sometimes just grabbing what actually that technology does and how it has such a huge impact across the globe with Hearst. It's really cool to take a step back and say, wow, not only has your role had changed, but also the criticality of the application has changed because of what it does and what it provides to Hearst, which is so neat.
Right, and you're coming from a system that was steady state for 25 years. So we're not near steady state here. So it'll keep evolving and eventually it'll change. That's what I'm saying. Every day's an adventure.
It'll be like there'll be a Revolution 3. We just don't know what it is.
It'll be Rev 3 in another year or so. It'll change again, and it will change. And the people that came onto the project, it was high risk. People didn't know they left their current jobs to come onto the project, and I would say, I think they're probably all with the company and moved in, still with the project, or moved on to other positions within the company.
Which is part of the goal.
That's part of the goal, right? Exactly.
So when we think about it, I know that I've seen some questions in the chat, and we'll get to those questions shortly. I know there are people who are asking questions like, well, how do we know what the signals are for, ourselves to say, okay, a transformation is necessary. We've got to transform now. And what are those signals, and how do we read those signals in advance so we can be ready to change or continue to be ready to change and evolve? Maybe David, you could share a little bit about what that, what you look for, or what a company might be looking for as they're thinking about their own transformation?
Sure. I think there's many different signals, and there's different approaches to do this, right? What seems to be a common approach is to do a benchmark, to benchmark whether it's finance cost or other costs, and say, we're in some quartile and we have a case to change. And our consulting partner is probably happy for us to go down that path, even though my personal view is that you kind of know where you're not performing at peak. For us, I think the other so aside from the kind of quote unquote scientific benchmarking approach, it's just looking at how long does it take to change things, right? Do you have the capabilities that you need to run the business? And if you don't, how long does it take to change those? And if that takes a long time, what you tend to see is you get a lot of point solutions that pop up here and there to address whatever the enterprise solutions can address. Which then, as time goes on and you get more and more of those, you just get an incredibly complex landscape, which makes, again, change more complicated and difficult. So I think looking at the capabilities that you have and how long it takes to make changes to meet business requirements, I think is the key signal. We haven't really talked about, people, process, technology, and data. We haven't really talked too much about the people. And to Deborah's point, right, things are changing and things will continue to change. And to think that we can, or anybody can, articulate a year or two in advance of what an enterprise solution is going to look like, exactly how it's going to work, is probably a little bit unreasonable. So the ability to adapt to these changes and have a platform that can adapt to those changes, whatever they may be. There may be new business requirements, there may be new operating models, et cetera, but having a platform that you don't have to re-implement to deal with those changes. I think that's another kind of critical factor in picking a platform as others embark on this similar journey.
And David, to add to that, and one of our guiding principles was no customization, which I think was critical for our implementation along those lines.
Yeah, no, and one of the things that I like that both of you mentioned was this concept, and David, you touched on this when we spoke last, so this concept of product currency, and not to be in a situation where, 5-10 years from now, right? Like you leapfrogged everything, you made this all-in decision, and now you want to make sure you kind of don't ever need to do that again. And so it's like, how do you make sure that you make an investment in a partner like Oracle where there's that product currency and you can be sure, even if you might not know the circumstances of the business or how the businesses are evolving, you can be sure that the product and the services are going to stay current. And I thought that was just something interesting to share.
Yeah, and I think I saw that was one of the chats or questions in the chats, which was around how do we pick Oracle. And frankly, one of the biggest reasons was, we talked about cloud or SaaS, and there's a little bit of distinction between something being the cloud and something truly being SaaS. And what we wanted was SaaS, right? We wanted somebody else to be responsible to update our environments on a regular basis to get these new capabilities, without us having to go through upgrades and huge testing efforts, et cetera. So I think the SaaS aspect is really what drove the decision from the beginning.
So maybe just a little quick poll, audience poll. One of the things we talked about was just the ability to now make more informed decisions based on what the technology provides, based on the insights that you can grab. So I just wanted to ask those listening, what insights are you hoping to get within your own business? And let's just get some feedback about what people are thinking about. Is it because you're trying to understand just what areas of business, of your particular business are growing or changing or declining? Is it making decisions about where to invest or shift focus? Is it to do something similar to what Deborah shared about in terms of managing talent and understanding what segments of your own company you're trying to diversify or potentially upskill, as Deborah mentioned, or I just put this one in here in terms of figure out where the money is going. We talk about the OpEx spend and understanding what parts of the business potentially are spending more or less, or areas where you might want to de-invest or invest more? I'd love to see what your feedback is. Okay, cool. So really pretty tied in terms of understanding what areas of my business, what different areas of my business are doing, and then making decisions around investments. And then interesting, managing talent. So really almost across the board. And so what I see from here, and Deborah and David, love your feedback, but is just the desire to understand what's happening across a lot of different attributes within everyone's individual businesses is really important. And so figuring out how to do that and how to have that right platform, and then set of, whether it's autonomous data warehouse or other insights that you can grab so you can make decisions similar to what Deborah, you shared. So thank you guys for participating in the host and for participating in the poll. And what I would love to do now is just go to a little bit of Q&A. Deborah and David, you guys have been awesome in answering questions in the chat live as we've been going through. I know there's an open question, so I'm just going to pull that one up and then look at some of the other areas of questions. And then, just maybe one of the things I'm not sure if we even touched on enough is just like, why Oracle? You decided to jump all in with Oracle. What was it about Oracle that made you feel confident in making that decision? Deborah, maybe you could comment, and then David, you.
All right. At the time, we were going cloud first. I was running a project moving all our data centers to the Amazon cloud at the time, which was 5 years ago. And we had projects going on. We were going cloud first on everything. When we were looking at all the products out on the market, Oracle was the only one that had 100% cloud and then integrated product across finance, HCM, and the whole product line. So that was number one. We did a tour of all the companies in California. We were looking at relationships. We were looking at people. Of course, Steve Miranda. We felt comfortable with Steve. Felt comfortable with the product. People, we felt comfortable with support. We felt that the product was mature enough to support our business. So those were the main items right there.
Yeah, and I think we don't talk enough about the criticality of the integration of all the products working together.
Integration, yep, absolutely.
Sounds like it was really a critical piece too.
Absolutely, it was. And even today it is. At Hearst, on the HCM side, if we, and this is an important piece, if we go with an Oracle product, we do not allocate back to the businesses. And I do not like doing integrations of other products because of the overhead and the cost. I prefer not to do that. So that's one of the reasons we do not allocate back.
No, that's a really good point, because, we always use that term collectively, in our industry, just around shadow IT, right? And it's like making sure that you really have one platform so you can really get the benefits of that one platform. David, any insights for you in terms of why Oracle?
I think we covered most of the why Oracle. I think, one of the other questions that was out there is around challenges and lessons learned. Obviously there's doing these types of programs have the obvious challenges around stakeholder management and getting to common and no customization, all that stuff. I think one thing that I was not necessarily expecting, or maybe I was underestimating on a personal level, is, when you leapfrog 25 years of technology, right? We had a set of users that were very much used to the green screen data entry type environment. And to get, you look at the skills that's required to operate in that environment versus what it takes to operate in a modern solution that has a lot more capabilities. I think, not underestimating, and change management is a thing that we tend to throw around a lot, but really understanding how do you drive adoption of these new capabilities? Because in several cases, we found that people were doing their old job and their old processes in the new environment, and then complaining that it was taking longer, not as efficient. So truly understanding and communicating and educating users to make the transition into how to maximize what they can get out of these modern tools. I think that's definitely something that I personally underestimated. And part of our challenge is we have finance people in 160 locations alone across North America. So it's not like you're in one place where you can look over somebody's shoulder to see how they're operating. And really that took longer, and it was a post go live item, right? It's something that people struggled with after we went live. So that was definitely a challenge.
I mean, there's definitely that theme, right, around people, right? And it's like, you know, Deborah, you mentioned that in terms of, I felt confident with the people from Oracle I was working with and the team and their commitment to her success. David, you mentioned this in terms of some of the challenges and things that you maybe didn't anticipate in terms of people, right? And their desire to continue doing some things in the ways that they always had, whether it's green screen or something else, and then wondering why it's not working as well or it's taking too long. And so it's just a really interesting theme. And now today, right, you know, Deborah mentioned this, David, you talked about this in terms of upskilling people, keeping teams together, keeping that connection together. That's almost the critical glue across all of these different elements of this implementation over time. So maybe I'll just love to ask like one more question. What was the biggest surprise? You know, David, you mentioned you weren't necessarily expecting some of that in terms of, you know, people doing business or doing some of the things that they were doing their old way, if you will. But what was there anything that was just like really surprising where you're like, you know what, wow, I did not expect that maybe either one of you could share?
You know, it's funny, you know, one of the concerns we had about picking cloud, right? If you had an on-premise solution, if you have missing functionality, you know, you send a few developers on it and business analysts, and they'll create something, and you'll bridge the gap, so to speak. And one of the concerns from early on was, you know, what happens when we run into something where there's a gap in the functionality? And I think looking back, you know, does everything work exactly the way that you wanted it to work? No, but we really didn't find any gaps. Right, we have, as you saw in the picture before, we have a pretty broad footprint of all of the different solutions. And I don't think we've ever come to the point where we had to throw our hands up and say, there's this gap that we just can't bridge. And I think also having, you know, the relationship with Oracle where we can get to the people that designed it and say, well, geez, we're trying to do this. How is that supposed to work? How do you guys think about this? Has been hugely successful. But I think the surprise that we really did not run into any real functional gap for the product.
Thank you for sharing that. There's one quick question I wanted to answer that came up in the chat, which is maybe Deborah to you. What other Oracle Cloud applications are you considering to help improve employee productivity or even health and safety as they're performing remote work every day? Is there anything quickly that you could share in terms of insight or what you might be considering, if anything, or maybe ways you're using current applications around productivity or health and safety?
Health and safety. The ones we're using, like I said, are the LMS. We're using onboarding. We're looking at implementing, I'm looking right now, HR help desk. I don't think that would be one. Probably succession planning and talent modules we're looking at also, but these are the smaller add-ons that we're looking at right now.
Yeah, no, that's great perspective. I just wanted to grab that because it came in. So with that, I'll close the Q&A, and I want to say thank you, Deborah and David, for being flexible with us today and being resilient and sharing with us just this incredible story of the partnership that you've had with Oracle, and being open to sharing your lessons learned and, you know, how both of you and your roles have evolved along the way. So with that, I also want to thank everyone in the audience for joining us today and being a part of this conversation. You see this on the screen. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out and contact us through this Customer Spotlight Series _US at oracle.com. We're going to send out a quick one-question survey. And with that, thank you so much for your time, and we hope you'll join us on August 27th for our Spotlight with Navigo. Thank you so much.